as we continue our discussion on the great Slayer song Black Magic, we're going to bring in the man who played on the song and also co-wrote the song, Mr. Kerry King. Kerry, how are you?
Good morning, my friend.
Good morning. It's still morning.
It's morning for you. Just hit noon for me, but
Yeah,
that's still fucking morning.
it's good enough. So, so let's start by, I want to talk about your latest release, which you just put out, which is phenomenal, by the way. How's it going so far?
Killer, man. I mean, it feels to me like it's been out like 2 years, but it's only been out like 6 months. So, um, it's odd for me when we go play because it seems to me like it's been out for so long, but kids are still getting used to it. Every show, more and more kids are singing it back at Mark and us, which is super cool. Means they're getting it and liking it. Um, so yeah, just continuing to get out there. And in like 5 days, I go to Australia to entertain my friends from down under, and January and February we're doing the States and Canada again.
Yeah, excited for that. How much of this record did you write during COVID?
Um, a lot. I was playing by myself for a long time before me and Paul felt comfortable enough to get together, travel, me coming from the East Coast now, we still play in Southern Cal. Um, so I played a lot on my own. Like Slayer's last tour was the end of November of 19. So by the end of the Super Bowl in 2020, I was full force, working on, new material, new ideas. And I did that for quite a while. I don't think Paul and I got together until 2021 to start working on this stuff. But at that point, there was leftover stuff from Repentless. Now there's leftover stuff from Hell I Rise for the next record, and plus all I've written since then. But yeah, during COVID, Paul and I both came down with it, and I think it was June of 21, and I was stuck in California, at the hotel I stay in for rehearsals because I certainly wasn't going to fly home and give it to my wife. Um, but fortunately, mine lasted like 3 days. It was like, jumped in my body, got scared, and jumped the fuck out. Um, Paul had it off and on for the better part of a month, so it took us a while to get back to it. But that being said, I remember when I was in that hotel room stuck for a few days, I finished the last two lyrical songs I needed, and then we were good to go.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of really good music was written during COVID because people were so angry that they're stuck inside and can't go anywhere in life. It's going to stop. So I was curious
Yeah, man,
about that.
it's like being in house prison.
Yeah, exactly. So I was lucky enough to see your first, well, not first US show, but first date on the Lamb of God Mastodon tour with, by the way, we're talking about Kerry's new band, Kerry King, and from the album From Hell I Rise. So I went to that show, and the first time I'd seen you guys live, and obviously I know everybody in the band. They're all amazing musicians and also very amazing people. Show was awesome, but one thing I was really happy about is that you played a couple Slayer songs. Obviously, you kind of have to, and one of those was Black Magic. So how did it come about that you picked that song?
Well, I wanted to focus on things I had written or co-written because I didn't want to fuel anybody's fire for ammunition that might hate my band and hate me or whatever. Those people do exist out there. So I'm like, how can I do this the most straight up way? So I'm like, nobody can pick on me if I play songs that I co-wrote or wrote. So it started there. Raining Blood has to be played because if I'm playing one song throughout the history, it's kind of got to be that one. And Black Magic pairs really nice with it. Plus, it's a killer song, from our first record ever. So there's history there. And I wanted to definitely hit some nostalgia points because all the stuff we're playing is brand new KK material. But to throw in, stuff that people have liked for decades, and if we play a longer set, yeah, sure, then we'll play Disciple, then we'll play Chemical Warfare, we'll play Repentless. But, we only had 40 minutes on that run. So, I think we played 9 songs, so to have 2 from Slayer, I think is a nice representation, as well as playing a shit ton of our new stuff.
Yep, it was perfect. So, all right, let's now go all the way back to the making of Show No Mercy. So I remember when we were in the studio making that thing, and I'd produced a few records at that point, but I had not been in the studio with a band at that point where I was kind of going, oh, there's something really interesting happening here. When you guys were making that record, did you feel that, or was it just you're so young that you're just kind of learning, or did you feel like, hey, this is really something cool going on?
Well, we were absolutely learning. We didn't have anything to bounce it off of. It was all, first, getting our feet wet in the studio. And I do remember we played throughout the night because no one wanted to record then, so we got a better rate. And we would leave like when the sun came up.
Yep.
But yeah, new experience. So we didn't know, it was completely learning for us, as well as, having a good time and saying, hey, people are finally going to be able to check out the music we've been writing. That's, at the end of the day, that's the coolest part of it.
Yeah, I listened to the album the other day. I hadn't listened to it for a little while. I listened to it the other day, and I was, I don't want to pat all of ourselves on the backs, but obviously, look, it's a classic record. We know that. That's what we're talking about the song today. But it sounded a lot better than I kind of remember it sounding. I was like, that's for how little amount of money we had and little time we had. It sounded really good. And I thought to myself, because I remember being in the studio when we were making it, that you guys just sounded good. Like everybody's tone was really good. The drums sounded good. The bass sounded good. Like your tones were really good. Did you guys really work a lot on getting your tones perfect before you went in the studio? Or is it just kind of a natural thing?
I think at that point it was a natural evolution of where we had gotten to. Um, because until you land on what you're happy with, it's a work in progress. And I think by that point we had kind of locked into pretty much where we were, for the rest of eternity since then. Locking in the tone, the distortion to the point where it's not too distorted, but heavy and full sounding. So, but beyond that, miking and how the board hears it is something that I have no control over. So that's tweaking it once it gets on tape.
Yeah, I don't think we had to really tweak a whole lot of it because, like I said, it sounded just so good coming out of the speakers and everything else. It was fun. Of course, we the famous story where Bill Matoyer had to take the cymbals down because they're bleeding all over everything, and poor Dave had to overdub cymbals. But aside from that, I think it
That was
came
an
out
odd
pretty well.
experience, and we only did it on that record.
I don't think I've ever heard of that before, or I think maybe one or two other people have talked about it, but it wasn't something that was normally done. And I'll never forget being in the studio when Dave was overdubbing the cymbals, so just hysterical, just standing there and like waiting to hit the cymbals at the right time. Very bizarre experience, but came out good.
Definitely different.
So where was this song in terms of when it was written, in terms of how many songs you had written for Slayer at that point? Was it first, second, 10th, 9th, 7th? Do you remember even?
I really have no idea, to be honest, but I would say I don't think it was beginning or end. I think it was just middle of the road.
Yeah, because I was trying to remember when I saw you the first time. I don't recall that you played this song necessarily, but that's so long ago, it's hard to remember. So it's a
Yeah, the
classic.
first time you saw us, we were probably still doing a bunch of covers.
Yeah, you were opening for Bitch at the Woodstock, Radio City or Woodstock. I forget which one. And yeah, it was like probably half covers and half originals, but it was obviously really good.
Those two venues are right next door to each other, by the way, if nobody knows.
Yeah, in Orange County, California. So this had become such an iconic song. And we're talking about songs that define heavy metal, right? And this is one of those ones where obviously every single metal band and metal fan pretty much on earth are Slayer fans. And it's interesting to talk, there's obviously there's, Raining Blood and South Heaven and, all these different, songs that are kind of the bell tone songs that people talk about. But this one song I've noticed over the years has really kind of become in the people's top 5 Slayer songs. And it's certainly one of mine, obviously, but it's interesting that that's the case. Do you feel the same on your side as well?
The only notice I can mention anywhere remotely regarding that is when we play it live, it gets a huge pop, like bigger than I expect. Um, of course, it's in a different medium now because it's Kerry King presenting it, but it is my history, so I feel I should be playing it. But it really, once people figure it out, because we generally tie it on the end of Raining Blood, so they don't know if we're going into the guitar chaos at the end of Raining Blood or what the hell we're doing. But then when the kick drum comes in, they generally figure it out that it's black magic and the place fucking lights up.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. Ever since, I mean, really, obviously since the beginning, but when kind of in the I don't know, mid 2000s something, when you pull out, it's kind of, it's an older iconic song that people are super into it, and they know the song. It's really interesting. And like I said, I talked to so many different fans and kids that just love that song. Like, what's your favorite Slayer song? And a bunch of them will say that song. I'm like, really, over the other ones? Like, yeah. It's like, oh wow. I like that. I like that analogy.
Yeah, there's decades worth of stuff for them to pick, and for people to this day to still pick that one, it's pretty important.
And by the way, when you guys are doing it, Mark Osegueda, who's your singer, who's like one of the best singers of all time, and also again one of the nicest people of all time. Sorry to ruin that for you, Mark.
Yeah.
But he sounds great singing that song. I really, because not really sure, people doing Slayer songs that it's not, Tom. It's like, how is this going to work over? Because it's difficult to do because Tom has such a unique voice. But I thought Mark really, especially, I mean, he did it great on both songs, but I thought this one specifically, he nailed it.
Yeah, he before we people may not even know this, but before Mark even got my gig, he would come down every once in a while and do demos with me and Paul. He's the only singer we had come down because he's my friend. He's in the Bay Area. It's super easy to get him in, and he wanted to, see if he could do this and if we could work on him and create a new Marco Segeda that people weren't used to hearing. That's what we did for months and months before he got the gig. Um, I worked on him a lot. And then we got in the studio, and then Josh Wilbur, we both worked on him because we wanted to create a new Marco Segeda. There's nothing wrong with the old one, but I wanted to create a new, more fierce Marco Segeda. And I think we got it. And I think that translates into the Slayer stuff.
100%. I mean, when you first played me the record, I mean, obviously I knew who was singing, but I was like, wow, it doesn't sound like Mark at all. It's
That's what I was going for.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I talked to him about it too. I was like, is it difficult to sing that way? Because it's totally different from the way you normally sing. He says, no, I actually don't really have a problem with it. Because I was like, you're going to blow your voice out on the road? And he's like, no, it's fine. I can do it. It's not a problem.
Dude,
It's become pretty easy for him now.
when he sang the second song he sang was Residue in the studio. And I went in the studio, Josh is sitting in there, and I went, how did you guys get to this register? We've never rehearsed this like this before ever. So he's like, well, that's where Mark was comfortable. So I went to Mark immediately and I'm like, listen, man, is this reproducible? I don't want you singing this for 2 shows and then blowing your voice out for 5. I'm like, I don't want that to be our MO. I want to be able to play and to perform and people hear you how they hear you on the record. And he swore up and down he can do it. And God damn it, he was right.
Exactly. That's crazy. So keep saying that. So you guys have come back and played a few Slayer shows after being away for 5 or 6 years. And I didn't get to go to either one of the shows, but I obviously saw a lot of the footage, and it's kind of surreal for me. And that's why I kind of want to get your perspective, that it's just so over the top huge, like massively huge. The entire audience is going completely nuts. Like they did on obviously on all the shows you guys played previous, but it seems like there's a newfound energy and there's even more people that are into it now because you kind of went away. Do you feel that way too?
I told this story the other day. It's kind of like when we did the first Big Four show. I said, this is going to be really cool for the fans, and it'd be good to see the guys, and that's about all I gave it. But then we actually played the show, and a handful more shows. I said, you know what, this is really cool for me, and I didn't expect that, and I didn't expect that when we did the Chicago show. I went with the exact same idea. I'm like, this is going to be really cool for the fans, especially fans that were too young to see us. Um, and I hit the stage and I got goosebumps. I'm like, this is way bigger than I ever gave it credit for.
Yeah, it's just amazing, and it was super fun to see. Just like I said, the amount of people that were into it and the fervor of it. Like you see a lot of these festivals, and the big bands get a good reaction, but this was something kind of almost over the top special. I was like, wow. Now I was really bummed I didn't go because I wanted
Well,
to
we
see
got a
it
lot of
live.
history in Chicago too. So for the reunion show to be there, it was pretty epic, and the response was over the top. Like you said, it was way overwhelming.
Back to the writing of Black Magic. Do you remember where the riffs came from or who wrote which parts? I mean, it's a long time ago.
Um, that is a good question. Um, I know Jeff and I were both responsible for the music, but picking out who did what, um, if I sat down and listened to it and start picking it apart, I could probably figure out 70-80% of it, but I'm sure there'd be a gray area where like, I don't remember. I think I did all the lyrics, but maybe I didn't. I would have to look at the writing credits. I don't even know.
It's just you and Jeff. So, but it just says
Yeah,
written by you guys.
it
So it didn't
was.
say who wrote what. But you and
Yeah.
Jeff had a pretty amazing relationship in terms of music because all those songs that you co-wrote, basically, which is a lot of them, they feel like they're complete songs that were almost written by one brain, if that makes any sense. Like I couldn't tell like who wrote which parts ever either because it was all so cohesive and worked together so well. How do you describe that dynamic?
Well, at that point, he was already into punk, and vomiting it back at poor Tom and myself because we weren't into it yet. Jeff got into it, and my whole thing back then was I was into the singers. I was into Halford. I was into Dio, which I am to this day. Um, so it took me a while to figure out you don't have to have a great voice. You got to have the heart, the commitment, the conviction. And that's what happens with punk. And once I understood that, I'm like, it don't matter if they're playing 3 power chords, you don't need a riff if you've got the conviction and the commitment. So eventually I came around. But at that point, Jeff was super into the hardcore punk scene. And I think that helped with the speed of Slayer, which I would attribute to Venom as well, maybe Motorhead. But um, back then, that's where all that came from. And although I wasn't into punk at that point, I was into all the metal bands Jeff was into, and we had the same heroes and influences. So I think that lent itself to where when he and I wrote back then, it was very difficult to tell who wrote what. When we matured as writers, I think it became easier because for a long time he did all the moody stuff and I didn't. It's funny, I actually became the guy that wrote more punk stuff. Funny how that turned out, but later in our career, yeah, I could tell more about the riff and who wrote it by listening to it and knowing where it came from.
Well, that's the magic of Slayer, and really the whole movement that you guys created was all the influences came from all the European heavy metal bands that we all loved, but then there's this infusion of punk rock that came in that gave it that kind of extra little bit of umph. And I always argue with about Iron Maiden, and those first couple Maiden records kind of had that punk influence, even though Steve Harris was like, no, I hated punk and whatever. But it somehow creeped into his writing
Oh, it's
style.
very, very punky. Yeah,
Yeah,
I will be on your side for that argument.
yeah, and I think you guys kind of took it to the next step and really perfected it. How did you feel? Obviously we were from California, Southern California, which is not the most metal place in the world, and the scene was not the most. It ended up being, a different type of metal for a lot of it. But how do you feel coming from California affected the way you wrote and how the band came together and the outlook of what you guys were doing?
It's definitely got something to do with it because if you look at it in that perspective, I would argue to say that Slayer, Metallica, and Megadeth are cut from the same leather, I guess, to where if you put Anthrax in that conversation, you say, yeah, they're from New York. They totally sound different. They don't sound like the other guys. And of course, we all have little niches and we all have little things that are, you know, have our own stamp on it, but the West Coast guys definitely sound different than the New York guys. And you can say the same thing about punk too. West Coast punk and NYC punk, for instance, are very different things, and they're the same thing. It's really weird, but you can definitely tell Southern California in our music. I can. It's funny. I was listening to Offspring last night, and you can it's just spewing Southern California. You get some of the lyrics. I'm like, that means something to me because I grew up there. I get this. So yeah, I hear Southern California in our music, but that might be hard to understand for somebody that's never been there, never lived there.
Yeah, it's interesting because most of the metal bands, like all the English and European bands, came from like the East End of London or Birmingham, these horrible, miserable places. So of course they were angry and writing very heavy metal music. But we all grew up in Southern California where the weather's nice and we have the beaches, and still able to get the to get that angst and the love of metal out of it. It was I found really interesting, and it was just such an odd place to have this whole scene happen. But
yeah,
for me, it was great.
Our angst also came from the Hollywood scene because hair metal was exploding. Motley Crue and Rat and all that stuff, and anybody from Orange County, which is where we played, where Woodstock and Radio City was. We hated that and we rebelled against it. That's why we had the black eyeliner for record one. We wanted to be the antithesis of what Hollywood hair metal was.
Yeah, and that definitely fueled a lot of the angst because I was the same way. I was obviously firmly in the real metal camp and not a fan of all that other stuff. But you're right. I think that definitely on an interesting role played a part of it. So looking back all these years later on Black Magic, what do you think of when you hear that song or when you play the song? Do you think of anything?
I still think it's a good riff. It's got good riffs in it for sure. It's fun to play, which a lot of things aren't 40 years later. But it's still fun to play, and the fans go off, which makes my job easier because we're just having a good time between the fans and ourselves on stage. The energy is killer, so it's fun to play. It's fun to play live.
Yeah, obviously none of us when we were making this record had any inkling that all of this would happen. Like, I mean, I get asked the question. Everybody gets asked this question. Like, could you ever envisioned all of this happening to you and the band over all these years from those early days?
No, I did. What was I, 19 when I recorded that? If you told me then that 40 years later I'd still have a career and be able to play on some of the world's biggest stages to this day, I'd be like, "Fuck off! You're fucking nuts." And then here I am.
Yeah, it's just you just talk about that stuff, and it's just mind blowing. Like, just a real quick story that kind of shows you that I was when Metallica's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, they had a party afterwards. It just ended up being like Lars and I at the wee hours in the morning having a adult beverage, and he just looked at me. He goes, "How the fuck did all this happen?"
Yeah.
I don't know, dude. It doesn't make any sense to me either. It's just kind of the same thing. Like, wow, this is just insane that these bands coming from LA these years later have become. I mean, not just you having a career and being successful, all that. It's iconic. I mean, this is legendary stuff. This stuff is gonna live the test of time forever. It has influence. I mean, this influenced so many people on so many levels. It's just kind of mind-boggling.
It's very cool. It's cool to be mumbled in the same phrase as Iommi or Dave Murray, Glenn Tipton, KK Downing, all the heroes, Richie Blackmore. It's cool that I'm even a thought in that phrase, that sentence. I never thought that would happen, and it's super humbling that some people regard us like that. So, that's a big thing for me. Is like don't let the music fill your head with thinking how great people think you are. Just be humble for the experience and that people dig what you're doing.
100%. I think we all started out as fans, and we still are fans. And
Oh
I
yeah,
think
totally.
that's why a lot of the metal scene, I noticed there's less and less of that, egotistical kind of thing that there is in other forms of music, just because we're all fans. We're still all fans. And I think that kind of makes everybody's feet still firmly on the ground.
I think we're all fans until you meet the biggest hero that you can't talk to. And then you're over the hump and you feel like you're part of it, but you're still a fucking fan.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree there. It's craziness. Well, anyway, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. I know you got a busy schedule out there, so thanks for taking the time and talking about the phenomenal Slayer song, Black Magic. And have fun on the road. I'm sure I'll see you somewhere soon.
Absolutely, brother. You better get out there.
Yes, sir. Thanks,
Cheers.
dude. Awesome. That was